Is your practice tired of wrestling with insurance denials, deciphering EOBs, and watching your revenue slip through the cracks? You are not alone. Welcome to The Claim Game, the podcast designed to cut through the confusion and provide you with the best practices for revenue cycle management success. We are Jeremy and Catherine Zug, and we've been with people just like you in the trenches. Each week, we'll break down complex billing processes, share real-world solutions from practices like yours, and ask questions of the game makers and changers of healthcare so you can take control of your revenue. Let's turn those claim denials into deposits and help you return to focusing on patient care. It's time to win the claim game.
In today's episode of The Claim Game, we get the chance to interview Cathy Gilbert, who brings over 30 years of healthcare industry experience. She currently has an independent consulting practice, and she serves as a consultant to insurance companies, electronic health record systems, big health systems after a vast career in provider network management, i.e. credentialing. Cathy served as the Vice President of Network Development at Magellan Healthcare, and during her role there, she directed a national team to support network development and provider relations for health plans, employers, Medicare, Medicaid, and this included design and negotiation of value-based contracting strategies. Also, Cathy led a network operations team responsible for credentialing, provider data maintenance, rate management, and contract administration for all networks. Before that, Cathy served as the Assistant Vice President of Network Operations with Beacon Health Options in New York. In this role, she was responsible for overseeing provider file maintenance, provider file configuration, and provider credentialing. Prior to her work with Beacon Health Options, she served as the Vice President of Provider Relations at Beacon Health Options Value Options in Michigan. Cathy participated in internal and external committees, including credentialing, policies and procedures, provider satisfaction, provider stakeholders, and quality management. All that to say, Cathy is a wealth of knowledge in the credentialing territory and has served as a game maker for multiple insurance companies for many decades. She's going to give us some excellent insights today into the inner workings of credentialing, the black hole of healthcare. We're so glad to have Cathy on, and we hope you really enjoy this episode of The Claim Game. All right, today we have Cathy Gilbert here as the game maker of our episode. Cathy, thank you so much for speaking with me and with us today. I know our listeners are going to really benefit from your insight into the mysterious inner workings of credentialing.
It is challenging. You just have to know the rules.
Yeah, that's
but
right.
It varies a little bit by plan.
Oh, which I'm so excited to talk to you about. Tell us how you got here. Why did you choose to work on the insurance side of provider network management for so many decades? And give us a little bit of a rundown on your background.
So I actually started out as a social worker, so behavioral health background. But when I was doing a lot of direct service, I found I fell into some management roles within social services type organizations and found I really enjoyed it. So I still stayed in healthcare, but it's just kind of where the career happened. I moved from doing direct service as a care manager to actually leading programs for a residential treatment facility for they call IDD population now. And then from there, actually was CEO of an organization for a couple years, another residential treatment program for the IDD population, and then moved into community mental health and was doing contracting because I understood the inner workings from the provider side. And then from there, I kind of landed with a couple of the regional payer and moved to national payers and spent most of my career with what was then Value Options / Beacon. People now know it as Carelon, a part of the Elevance structure, and Magellan. So spent a lot of years between the two of those. And now I help provider organizations, mostly startups, navigate the wonderful world of managed care that we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, no, that's great. So you went from, correct me if I'm wrong, you went from the payer side to provider to payer side, or did I have that mixed up?
Yeah, I started out on the provider side.
Mm-hmm.
doing direct service at various agencies and organizations, and then moved into the more of the payer world. And now I'm taking the knowledge from the payer world back to the provider side.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, no, that's great. And I know that a lot of the clinicians that we work with find the credentialing and contract processing side very confusing, very mysterious. So what I was hoping to do is ask you some questions about that process first and then get into a topic that a lot of listeners are really interested in, which is rates and demystifying the rules for fee negotiation. But could you describe at a high level or at whatever level you want, really, the contracting process from the perspective of the insurance company?
So it's really two pieces that go hand in hand, contracting and credentialing. And each side, it varies a little bit by payer, which piece they choose to do first, and also depending on provider type. So, because doing a contract or doing a credentialing a provider, there's a cost on the payer side for that. So they want to make sure that when they're investing in that cost to validate a provider's credentials, be it a group practice, an individual, or a facility, that they're truly going to have a contract with that provider. Because either way, they're spending resources. So some payers do that kind of concurrently. Some say, hey, we've got a credential first to make sure they're going to qualify for a contract. Some may say, we want to have at least rates agreed before we'll start the credentialing process. So it's kind of a combination of figuring out those two processes, but they go hand in hand. So from the credentialing perspective for individual practitioners, it's usually filling out an online application. In most states, it's providing your CAQH number, because CAQH, that's the gold standard for getting everybody's information and should allow a one-stop place to put your information, and then submitting that, and then it's getting processed at the plan. And what the payer does is they have to, per usually NCQA requirements or URAC, there's some slight nuances to the two, but those are the two primary certifications for credentialing programs at payers.
Oh,
Uh,
interesting.
and it's part of their accreditation process. They do review their credentialing policy. So it all ties together for the overall operations of the health plan.
Could you say those terms again? I don't think I've ever heard of those two. Could you say those two again and maybe what they stand for and
Yeah,
what they do?
NCQA is the National Council on Quality Assurance. And if you've ever heard of HEDIS requirements or accreditation requirements, CVO certification, those are through NCQA. And most health plans are accredited by NCQA for their operations and the services they provide.
What happens if a payer loses its accreditation? I don't even know. You said a CDO accreditation or CDO?
CVO is a credentials verification organization.
Oh,
That's less common, but it's one of the certifications. There's multiple certifications on different things that NCQA offers, and most health plans are accredited by NCQA. That's one of the things that assures quality and consistency with the health plan.
mm,
And
hmm
it holds them accountable to NCQA standards, as well as they are accountable to their own internal policies based on NCQA standards. Because there's a little bit of leeway, but it holds them accountable. They're reviewed. Usually, I think it's like every 3 years, and they have to
Oh,
maintain their ongoing accreditation. So you'll see that logo on most health plans. The other one is URAC, and it's Utilization Review Accreditation Council, I think, but it's
wow.
related to utilization review, and that is another accrediting body that and it's a little more clinically focused. And health plans can have NCQA or URAC or both, and many have both.
Wow.
Yes.
You mentioned that they help ensure consistency and quality in the credentialing procedures. And I don't think those are two
Hmm.
words that a lot of providers in private practice, a lot of practice owners would associate with this process. So
Hmm.
when when you were looking at providers to bring into the network you managed, what did you
Hmm.
look for and what did I know we're a little bit of off on the trail there,
Mhm.
But when you did credentialing or you did provider network management, yeah, we'd like to
Mhm.
know what you were looking for in the providers and then how you managed to maintain the consistency and quality standards at the companies you worked at.
Right. So, what you're looking for with your providers, you usually have a policy that has minimum requirements that you're looking for a provider to join the network. And it's requirements around licensure, education, training. It could be insurance requirements, even maintaining malpractice insurance and liability insurance for the practice. It could be if it's a telehealth company or you're providing virtual care, assuring HIPAA compliance and that the transactions and the communications with the member are secure. So it's all of those types of different things that they look at for a provider to assure they meet the minimum standards set by your policy for being a part of the network. And they have standards by discipline. So in the mental health space, you have standards for MDs, nurse practitioners, physician assistants, social workers, marriage and family therapists, professional counselors. So any kind of, and even some of the specialties like people who treat autism, ABA, providing ABA services, peer support services, all of those types of things. You have standards and requirements in your laid out in your credentialing policy. You also have a set of policies for facilities. So, and for in mental health, especially, you have kind of general facility requirements, and then you may have specialized requirements when you're looking at a partial hospital program or an intensive outpatient program or different
Mm.
levels of care that we have within behavioral health that are a little different than the physical health side. So, what you're looking for first is programs that meet those minimum criteria. Then the next thing you're looking for is, do I need this provider? And I looked at it is the provider has to spend time and we have to spend time to join the network. Is there a need and volume that can really support the time both of us have to spend to join the network? So, and different states have different regs on when you can close a network and how you can close a network and what the
Mm.
requirements are. But in general, you're looking at to make it valuable to both the provider and to the plan to have you participate. I will say that in general, when I would look at the overall network, 80% of the care that we oversaw was provided by 20% of the network.
Whoa, really?
That 80/20 really provide. I mean, it had a tail, obviously, but you would have, the bulk of the care provided by a lot of high volume providers. And then you'd have a lot of providers that would see, maybe 1 to 10 patients a year. I mean, that's
Wow.
really low volume comparatively, but that's what we would find is, and some of that was a variety of reasons. Some of them were in areas where, like in Michigan, where you have large clinic practices or group practices in the area. So they tend to be high volume because they can meet a lot of different needs for a lot of people. And then you have other providers that are in more rural areas where you may have a smaller population or fewer people seeking care. So they're going to be your lower volume providers, but you definitely need them in your network because there's not a lot of other resources in some of those areas. So when you go to northern Michigan or to the Upper Peninsula, there's not a lot of
Mm-hmm.
providers. So you need them in their network, but they may not get a lot of volume. So you're looking at that access to care. Telehealth and virtual care has changed that because now if individuals are comfortable with virtual care, not everyone is, then you really can meet the need very, very quickly with virtual care providers as long as they're licensed in the state where the member's sitting.
Yeah, and as long
So,
as the care provider is actually providing care, right? I mean, I think
right.
is that part of the challenge though with telehealth is making sure that just because there's access to care doesn't necessarily mean the quality of care is very good, or is that not a consideration you think?
Quality of care is a consideration. There are things that, payers monitor more on the back end, except with you have to have enough volume to actually do analytics on a
Sure.
payer's practice.
Sure.
So if somebody's seeing 5 patients a year and they're a generalist and you may have 5 different diagnoses, because there's different evidence-based practices for treating different diagnostic categories. So if you're not seeing a lot of volume, it's really hard to do any measurement for that particular plan. So I would look at for quality, I would check those administrative things that were easy to check. Like, okay, are we having any claims issues? Are claims coming in clean? Are we getting any complaints? And
Oh, okay.
honestly, if we get a complaint about a provider, plans take that pretty seriously because complaint volume is actually very low. I mean, it's more usually a complaint about I can't find a provider versus a complaint about a provider.
Yeah, that's
There's a
right. Like
difference.
ghost networks, I'm sure you have a lot to say, but
Oh my
that would
God.
make sense. Yeah,
Huge issue. And to me, that's on the plan and the provider. And we can go into that. That's a dual effort to keep that information accurate.
sure. And
Because
does CAQH play a role there, or because you
it
said it
can play a
should be
role.
the gold standard of making sure the information is accurate, but there's that
Mhm,
little word there, there's the should word.
mhm,
Talk about that. I mean, I think we can divert a little bit over to
mhm,
the Ghost Network side and
mhm,
CAQH, but talk about how
mhm.
that's a dual effort. Yeah.
Yeah, so CAQH, if it is dependent on a provider putting in their information accurately and updating it on a regular basis. Now, I know CAQH puts out reminders to providers on a regular basis to update your information to verify that it's accurate. But a lot of things in information is free text. So if you type and make a typo and don't catch it, you're going to have an inaccuracy. So it's all of those types of things and keeping that current. And then some of the things plans could use CAQH for pulling the credentialing app, but they may not have the expanded partnership, which is another service CAQH offers of directory validation.
Oh,
So it's getting those regular updates. So it depends on how the plan is using CAQH because there's a lot of different requirements at the national level. On those networks, there's been legislation, especially, and it ties to the Medicare networks initially, but it trickles down um, to requirements to have plans outreach to providers to validate their information on a regular basis. And it can be outreach by email, it can be by phone, it can be by mail to get the provider to provide the updated information. But if the provider does not respond, or does not update that information, how is the plan supposed to get it? The provider is the source of truth about their practice.
mm-hmm.
Um, and it varies too. There's state regulations. California has probably the most stringent regulations on network validation that plans have to do. It does, and the regulation does put a requirement on the provider because what happens is if a provider does not validate their information, plans are required to take them out of the provider directory and could disenroll them from the network.
Whoa. So if a provider doesn't get that information back to the plan accurately
Hmm.
or in a timely way, or they don't reattest, they could lose
Hmm.
their participation in the network.
They could, because
Mm.
that would be one way we would clean the network. I'm like, okay, we've sent this provider email communications, we've done calls, we have tried, and the provider has not responded to update their information. Or we look and we say, hey, it matches CAQH. We haven't gotten a verbal from the provider, but if the provider's changed their phone number, we mail them a letter or send them an email. They've changed their email, we mail them a letter and they don't respond. Then yeah, you have no recourse. Where is that provider? Then you can
Oh, that's
remove them from the network.
is there
If
a
a provider chooses
process?
to disenroll, that's fine
Yeah.
too. But they need to look at their notice period in their contract and say, okay, I'm giving notice. And then also, what is their requirement to see members in care or get them transitioned to a network provider post the end of that contract?
This is something that comes up a lot, Kathy. I'm glad you said that because I think this is something that comes up a lot, a question that we get asked. So here's the question. We can talk about contract terms quite a bit,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to divert from some of the things I was going to ask you. But let's say a practice has um, a, a clinician, and they're in
Hmm.
network with 10 or 11 insurance plans, different insurance companies. But there's a requirement in those contracts. Correct me if I'm wrong. I could be wrong about this.
Hmm.
There's a requirement to see members from
Hmm.
that plan.
Hmm.
Can a practice gatekeep their caseload? Can they say 10% cash, 10% this payer, 10% that payer? Or it's like a first come, first serve situation?
The plans require you to see their members. You can give a plan a notice, and plans will accept it that, hey, my practice is full. I'm not accepting new members for a period of time. They do time limit that usually, but it's important that you notify the plan so they're aware and they can put the not accepting new patients on their profile. So, because we know, especially an individual clinician, realistically, an individual clinician, if they're really working extra hours, you're talking 40 clients a week. I mean, that's a heavy caseload.
In mental health for
And
sure, but when you're
in
looking at
mental
like the,
health, you're
yeah,
right.
in the medical world, it could be like 40 a day or something,
Right.
even more volume, right?
Right. But in mental health, especially when you're doing counseling, it's really, 8 hours a day is a lot. It's draining. It's tough. So if you're thinking about that, you only have a practice capacity of, I'm thinking, because not everybody needs to be seen every week, that type of thing. It's a mix and match. A practice capacity of maybe 60 or 70 active clients at a given time. I mean, for an individual practice. It gets bigger as you have a larger group. Or if you're doing, for example, you have a nurse practitioner or a psychiatrist doing med management, those are shorter visits. A lot of times they can see a few more patients, but a counselor, so a psychologist or a social worker, let's say, you're talking half hour to hour sessions, depending on the member. And if it's a new member, maybe an hour and a half for an intake appointment. When you think about all those things, the volume that they can see and the number of new patients, and plans understand that, especially with the individual providers. So if you can notify them that, hey, my practice is full, I can't accept new patients. Now, on the other hand, if they see you're not seeing any of their patients and you've been on a practice full status for a year, what's the value of having you in their network?
Oh, and will they remove a provider or
They
a
may,
practice?
they could, if they're looking to say, hey, really isn't giving us any value, they could. And they could use their notice requirements. They could remove someone from the network. Now, that doesn't happen a lot unless in behavioral health, especially since they're really trying to keep access for people. But it is a question, and it would be potentially an outreach from a provider relations team to say, hey, practice has been in practice full for a year. What's going on? What can we,
Mhm.
if that could happen, especially if you're in an area where they really need access. They may make that
Oh,
call.
yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense.
Otherwise, as long as you're keeping up to date, it may not be noticed.
Oh no, that's very interesting. Kind of rolling back the script a little bit. That was very
Hmm.
helpful. How long should a clinician expect to take to get in network from the time of application submission to in network status? I can send a claim and get paid.
I would say 90 to 120 days. Max is an application expires. And I think NCQA may have just changed their date. The signature date, the attestation date signature expires. Um, and it's between 120 and 180 days
Oh
that
wow. Okay.
attestate that expires. So they need to get applications processed, or they'll be reaching out to request a new signature when they pick up the application. But realistically, 90 to 120 days. I've seen longer, just depending on what's going on with the plan. If they have a huge implementation or something going on. Otherwise, the way the plans process applications is it's usually like a first in, first out, but there are exceptions because
Hmm.
there are some state regulations, for example, that say you have to respond to a provider within 40. So the applications in that state, if you're working with a national plan, get pushed ahead because they have to be responded to because of a state reg.
Oh. And when you say a national payer, what are you referring to? What does that mean?
I'm referring to a national payer, so like a Magellan, an Optum, or United,
Oh, I
uh,
see. Yeah.
a Humana, Evernorth, Cigna, Evernorth, all of
Hmm.
those that are really have a large footprint. So your big payers that you really need to be in network with in most states, they have a centralized credentialing function, which means they have a credentialing unit that they process all their credentialing through.
For any specialty, any healthcare vertical?
Hmm.
Oh
Yep.
wow. Okay.
Yeah. So, because the things you're checking and verifying in credentialing, you're looking at graduation from an accredited school with, a master's degree, a PhD, a doctorate. So you're looking for that. You're looking for any specialized certifications or board certifications. You're verifying their state licensure. They have basic background checks that they do through various databases. So they're doing those and making sure that there's no, let's say, license sanctions. So they're doing for all specialties, there's kind of a set list of things that are very similar that you look at.
Hmm.
And then they may have groups within that that specialize in credentialing a certain specialty because they want them to know that. Or they may specialize by state, or they may specialize by, certain specialties. They may have one group that does all the behavioral health.
Oh,
They may have
wow.
another
Okay.
group. So they may break it out, and they also have it broken out by who does facility or organizational credentialing versus groups and individuals, because it's slightly different with a facility versus a group or an individual.
Well, that makes a ton of sense because the fee schedules would be different. And you're looking at,
Hmm.
it sounds like you're looking at a bunch of variables
Hmm.
that sound like a ton of work. We were talking
Hmm.
with a clinician in North Dakota who'd been trying
Hmm.
to get credentialed with Medicare for the better part of 14 months, which is way beyond the 180-day
Hmm.
benchmark. And it was an interesting thing because it's a group, so they're doing a lot of volume in a state that's not super popular.
Hmm.
And they would get to the finish line and then be told they have to start over. Have you ever seen that? And what if you are
Is
hitting?
it enrolling with Medicare through CMS or with a specific health plan? So if it's
That's a
enrolling
good
with
question.
Medicare through CMS,
Yeah.
that's a little different. That's like enrolling with Medicaid, and each state is a little different. Enrolling with Medicare at the CMS level, there's an enrollment process. And I forget it goes. There's an enrollment
Hmm.
process through for to enroll with CMS to enroll in Medicare,
Right,
and
because everybody has to have
that's
a
different.
PACOS ID, right?
Yes,
You have to have a PACOS ID, and then
yes.
you can get credentialed with the MAC
Hmm.
in the state or however it works in the state. What do you
Right.
say? What would be like your action items for a clinician who keeps hitting roadblocks like that? Because I think this is a common experience for
It's
private
right.
practices that it's like,
Yeah.
wow, we just keep hitting these blocks, and it sounds like each
Mhm.
payer is really different and state requirements
Mhm.
and quality assurance. What would be your
Right.
general advice, or are you just like throw spaghetti at the wall and see what
For
happens?
if it's enrolling with a CMS or we're enrolling with Medicaid in a state, if you're getting a roadblock, sometimes if there's a particular plan that you've been working with that wants you in their network for those lines of business, sometimes talking to them and saying, hey, can you help guide us? Or, is there anybody you have a contact that could help us figure out what's going on? For most of those, I would almost get on the phone with the provider and get probably on a Zoom meeting with the provider if I wasn't near their office and say, okay, I want to watch you do the application. I want to see what we're missing
Really?
if I was working with that provider.
Oh,
Because,
wow.
and a plan might not do that, but as I was working with a provider, that's what I would do. I'm like, okay, let's go look. Or I would outreach to, I have colleagues that I know, and I'd say, hey, I have a provider that's running into a roadblock with Medicare enrollment. I know you've done this quite a bit more than me because I don't necessarily haven't done the Medicare enrollment. I've read the regs. I know what we look for from the plan side, but I would
Hmm.
contact somebody that says, hey, help me find this. I have colleagues and friends who are experts in Medicare, or I would go to our Medicare expert within the health plan if I was at the health plan,
Oh,
because
wow.
usually that's the vertical and I'd say, hey, can you help me find what we're missing so I can help this provider?
So that's what you did during your tenure there, which makes
Mhm.
sense why you did this for so long. Is there somebody like you at every plan where they're trying to be helpful, or is this a matter of like cat and mouse? Like, would you see the plan and payer as in opposition to the practice and the provider?
I think genuinely the people that work at the plans, we genuinely want to help. But you have to think about the sheer volume that plans are looking at and size of their teams. Because what it would get to my team, you have the call center teams when you call the provider line, which is one group, and they can handle very, very basics. They know the rules, but anything complex, that's the teams that I directly managed would get bumped up. And most plans have that kind of a scenario that it can bump up to somebody with a little more experience, a little more provider partnership type of focus. And those are the people that can help do break through those things. The challenge is my teams were always small, relatively. Most of the time, I had a network of the smallest network I managed on a national scale was around 75,000 providers. The
That's
largest,
gigantic.
most plans have networks of 100 to 300,000 providers. And if If
Whoa.
you add in medical providers too, that was just in my behavioral health arena. So,
Oh.
so when you think about that sheer volume, and my escalation team for provider relations, provider partnership for the whole country was maybe 25 people.
That seems like
So,
not enough people to me.
but you have to remember, okay, 20%, 80% of the care is provided by 20% of the providers. So that's who
Okay.
you would focus on. And then if something else got escalated, you'd go take care of it. But you also had these high volume providers or key markets. That's where your focus ended up having to be
Mm.
because of you have smaller teams. Some plans have, regional teams and you can have different mixes and it depends on the type of plan. I mean, some plans probably have larger teams, but especially since I would say when I first started really doing managed care 25 years ago and doing provider networks, especially with Medicaid plans, we were more involved in the community. I was out there meeting with providers. It was a Michigan based MCO, one of the Michigan MCOs that's now part of United. So it's probably not
Mm.
the same anymore,
Probably not.
but probably not. But we were out in the community. I was probably out 2 days a week in my counties that I was assigned to meeting with providers. I was a contractor and I was out with one of the provider relations reps. We were talking to providers, helping resolve be it claims issues, access issues, anything that we needed to assist with. We were out there meeting with providers. That transitioned as we got to more, and I would say even when I got more nationally focused and plans became larger with all the mergers, acquisitions, things have changed in the last 25 years.
For
And where
sure.
you got more centralized teams, and as we move to more conference calls and phone calls, provider relations teams and provider partnership teams aren't out in the community as much. So they felt like, okay, you can manage more because you're not having to drive, you're not having to be
Uh,
on the road as much, and
Interesting.
you do
So it's
things
almost like the
virtually.
relation. Sorry, yeah. It seems like the
No, go ahead.
relationship got tore out of the role a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay.
And I mean, you still had some relationships, but it was more virtual.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some smaller plans in with smaller territories. They do have people more involved in the community. And there is community involvement, but it's different. Kind of like you hear now they talk about population health versus individual, where they're
Mm-hmm.
looking at that broader and the broader access. And I think the same things kind of happened with building provider networks. You're looking at that broader. We started doing instead of in person what we used to call provider forums or provider meetings, and we would do those. I was managing, really focused on Michigan at the time, and I was doing 4 a year, and we were hitting each area of the state where we had, and we were doing in-person meetings, try to do a CEU program and an administrative program, and try to do those and meet with providers. So I'd have, say I do one in the Detroit area, I do one out in Grand Rapids, I do one in the Ann Arbor area, I might do one go up to Saginaw, kind of hit different areas of the state to get and meet with providers in person. As technology came into play, we started doing those more as webinars, and
Oh,
that's a
I see.
different interface. But think about how we all function now. We're doing a podcast to talk about this.
Yeah, remotely. Yeah, totally
It's all
remotely.
remote.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I think some of that has changed. Um, and in your relationship with relationships work, and it kind of mirrors society in a little bit of ways, but it also behavioral health tends to be, and I'm a social worker by training, I like that in person. I like to talk to a person, but
Oh,
that's
for
that's
sure.
harder and harder to do these days.
It does seem a little harder to do.
This episode was brought to you by the Hourglass Learning Hub. We know that managing your practice's revenue cycle can feel complex. That's why Practice Solutions has built the Hourglass Learning Hub, a comprehensive platform designed to simplify every aspect of your billing machine. We've organized foundational knowledge across 6 critical domains: credentialing, patient registration, eligibility and benefits, payment posting, aging follow-up, and claim submission. Each piece is vital, and we've compiled revenue cycle management educational articles for a clear understanding of how they all interconnect, giving you those aha moments you've been waiting for. For practical application, dive into our DIY billing resources, the very tools and templates our own team uses to help you proactively manage claims and optimize cash flow. And when you hit a roadblock, our Ask the Biller feature provides a direct channel to our seasoned experts for personalized video responses to your gnarly billing questions. If you're ready to take decisive control of your practice's financial health, explore the Hourglass Learning Hub today. Become a member of the Hourglass Learning Hub to access these awesome resources. For the Claim Game listeners only, we are offering 15% off the annual membership, which means you can have access to all these resources today for only $425 for the year. Click the link in the show notes to get started today.
And on that note, we hear this a lot from clinicians in all shapes and sizes of private practice, whether it's from the medical side or behavioral health side. But how much follow-up would you expect a clinician or somebody in the clinician's office to do during this whole credentialing contracting process? Because it feels like squeaky wheel gets the grease. I'm not trying to misquote you at
Yeah.
all. It seems like those 20% of your network got a lot of attention necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe those smaller practices, like you're going to trade your time somewhere, even in those teams,
Right.
right? Yeah. So how much time
Right.
do
And you
you think?
just, well, for if it's a credentialing application,
Mm-hmm.
I would look and see what messaging they have on their website that say you, because usually they have something that says you can expect it to take approximately this amount of time. And now plans have portals where you should be able to log in and check the status of your application.
Oh, for
So
sure.
monitoring those, but I wouldn't start calling until you're beyond the time that they say. So like if they have on their website, hey, we're processing applications and it will take approximately 60 to 90 days. You don't call and check earlier than 60 days unless you hear from
Interesting.
them
Okay.
because it's not going to move it up. It's a first come, it's first in, first out, and they have all sorts of processes. So it's it's kind of like, okay, don't start really bugging them because what they're going to do is they're going to say, yes, they'll not document that you called, but you'll probably get a message when you talk because that calling in, you're talking to those frontline people, and they're going to say, well, we see your application is here. Now if they tell you they don't have it, then that's different, but I still wouldn't call as long as you got the confirmation when you submit it online that they've received it, because usually there's like kind of like you have a confirmation window that, hey, your application has been submitted. I would screenshot that and save it
Yeah. Save
just
that
in
in
case.
some
Yeah.
folder somewhere.
Yeah, just screenshot it. That, hey, I know I submitted it on this date. Here's my verification. A lot of them send you an email acknowledging receipt within a couple days. They have a process that, and it's strictly a receipt acknowledgement. It's an automated type of thing, but save that. And then once you get that and they've given you a time frame, because every time somebody calls with something that they, hey, we've given you a time frame, that's taking time away maybe from something else that needs to get done. So every
Oh,
call
that's
they have to
interesting.
when you think
Yeah.
about it, you're thinking about it from the plan perspective. But on
Yeah.
the other hand, if I'm working with a provider or I now is a consultant, if I'm working with a provider and it's somebody that's contacted us about joining the network, I've got a contact and I'm working with that person and say, hey, tell me when to follow up. I'm asking that person, tell me when to follow up. What should I expect? So it
Yeah.
kind of varies a little bit, but individually, when you're submitting an individual app, also even groups, because even plans even have a process. If you're adding someone to a group, it's a little bit different than adding somebody individually, because if you're adding somebody to a group, they're just adding you to the group contract. Then you don't have the contracting piece to do because that's just credentialing.
Yeah. You kind of
Because it's going to,
skip a process, right?
right, because the group holds the contract. If the group's already in network and they're just adding a clinician to the group practice under their contract, for most plans, you skip that contracting process.
That makes sense. That makes sense because you're just trying to add them to an already existing entity. They're well known. Now, you mentioned you have contacts, the insurance companies that
Mm-hmm,
can feel a little bit like a back door. Are those
mm-hmm,
contacts, I'm not asking you to open up your Rolodex or
mm-hmm,
anything, but would
mm-hmm.
would clinicians and practices have access to those same people, or is that just
They
an ancillary
could.
benefit? Yeah.
They could. I probably have more direct to some people because I know them. But
Yeah.
in general, yeah, you could have access to the same people because they have provider relations teams and they have assigned territories. I mean, if you look at some plans website and if you dig in a little bit, you can find a list of who's assigned to what area and who your provider relations representative would be that you want to get in touch with. So you just have to you can dig through that if you're going through like the provider manual or a provider relation network page and they have a contact us. And sometimes they do actually have a list. I've looked at some plans, they had a list of who was assigned where and the name of the person and their email address.
Wow.
So if I don't know somebody at the plan, that's where I go. I go try to
Okay.
find that contact. Or I've been known to do a LinkedIn search and look for the provider relations people at a plan, look at the people at a plan and go through LinkedIn and find the person. I'm like, oh, that's who I need to talk to. And I'll message him through LinkedIn. I've had providers do that to me even 15 years ago when I barely
Whoa.
got on LinkedIn. It was like,
I bet you
wow,
were
they
popular.
found me.
So if you just look up provider relations rep on LinkedIn, do a search, and then in your state
Yeah.
and in your area, and like
Yeah,
obviously like
limited, or if you're looking for a specific plan and do kind of the people at the plan, and then kind of look
interesting.
for the provider. I look for provider network, provider relationship, provider partnership, those kind of leads, and see if I can connect with them that way.
Oh,
And normally, because my connections are, the behavioral health and the managed care world, it may seem huge, but it's relatively small. And the network teams are it's a pretty small group, pretty incestuous, I would say, because we all moved around. So I usually
sure.
know somebody. So
Oh,
people that
wow.
I've worked with are now at plans I never worked for, but I have connections at those plans because everybody has moved around. So I can
Well,
usually
right,
find
that's
a
right. And I
connection.
think when that's right. And I think when you've been in this industry a long time. And I
Hmm.
think when you're in an industry for a long time, you meet everybody. Yeah, it seems like kind of a good deal.
Yeah,
So
Kevin Bacon's 6 degrees of, 6 degrees of
yeah,
connection.
separation. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
you're
sure.
gonna find somebody.
So let's say a clinician applies to a plan, they get
Mm-hmm.
their contract back. What are the terms that can be negotiated in a network contract, or is it just like sign it and move on?
There are a couple things you can look at depending on what the plan has. One is timely filing. Most plans put in, I know most of my contracts were 90 days timely filing. Sometimes Medicare's a year. Medicaid sometimes has its own things.
Hmm.
But if you really believe because of the population you serve or not having challenges getting insurance information, we know that can be challenging from people sometimes, that you can sometimes ask if they can give you a longer timely filing period. They may say no,
Whoa,
but they might give you, they might be able to negotiate that. If you don't have a
interesting.
problem with it, I wouldn't ask because it's going to delay your contract. Because anything you negotiate is going to take a little longer depending on what it is. Usually the contractors have specific things they can change, and then anything else has to go to legal. And you don't want it to have to go to legal because that's another black hole at a health plan
Oh,
because well, they have to review the language. And they have not just provider contracts. There's all sorts of things.
oh, gotcha.
So you can ask about timely filing. You have to read the terms and conditions. I always look for things like there's always indemnification clauses. I always look for reciprocity. Don't always get it, but I ask on those indemnification type of clauses. But just read it and say, okay, can I live with it? Then just sign it. Things like I would say indemnification, I'd ask about, I'd filing because those are important, or notice periods. The other one that they a lot of times put in is a silence is acceptance amendment. And one way health plans work, the provider manual or the provider handbook is an extension of your contract, and that's how it's viewed. And so when they update the contract, sections of the contract that you can make changes to. Timely filing, especially if it's a really short timely filing, like 90 days, you could ask. They may go up to, usually the max is 180 when they have that kind of limit. But if that's
Oh,
important to
interesting.
you to have a longer timely filing, you can ask. No guarantees. The other section is usually the indemnification sections. I read them to see if they're kind of reciprocal.
Oh, interesting. What does that mean?
But
Reciprocal?
it means that it says, usually they say something about the plans, the provider holds the plan
Oh,
harmless type of
interesting.
thing if the provider gets sued, or, so I kind of look for some reciprocity in those clauses. So you can ask. And it varies a little bit by plan, because you kind of have to read through the process. But those are the ones I look at. And I also look at the notice requirements. I was saying that health plans, the provider manual and provider handbook are part of the contract, usually by reference as an extension.
Oh, wow.
And any non-substantial plans to the handbook, they may have to send you a notice, but there's no negotiation.
Whoa.
So
So what
think
are the
about that.
terms you would say about notice? Like, what would you try to negotiate for? What have you negotiated for?
Usually, usually they have a clause for silence is acceptance
Oh,
notice. So a plan, you may get a notice from a plan that says, "Hey, we're changing this. If you don't respond in 30 days, it's part of your contract."
whoa. Okay.
So, looking at those and making sure, I've seen, especially at the facility level, maybe not at an individual, but at a facility level where they've asked for, hey, no, you have to, where we're going to require that we sign any changes, any non-regulatory changes
Okay.
to like health plan. A lot of times notices are just regulatory that, hey, the state changed this, we have to change our language. Here's the regulatory change. Those, I think that makes sense. But if it's something that is a policy change or something like that, look at that and see if that's something you want to, and you have to determine if you can live with it. What's your relationship one with the plan? What have you seen? What have you heard? Because, like I said, anytime you want to negotiate language, it's going to extend the time it
Is
takes to
legal a
contract.
black hole even internally at the insurance company?
It's a
Okay.
mix depending on what you're negotiating. So, especially for an individual provider, those contracts are pretty
Okay.
boilerplate, and there's not a lot of changes. It's the facility contracts, or if you have a large group practice, that there's usually more
Oh,
negotiation.
gotcha.
But like I said, you can still ask about small things that just kind of don't fit. The other thing I would make sure is if it's not your intent to participate with Medicare or Medicaid, ask that those addendums be taken out of the contract. Don't sign them if your intent is not to participate, that you only want to participate with commercial plans. Now, most plans will push to say, hey, we want you in all lines of business. It's easier to manage for them. And, it kind of makes it easier because sometimes it's hard to tell when you get a Blue Cross card, is that for the Blue Cross Medicaid plan or is that a commercial plan? What plan is it?
Wow.
You have to kind of dig in. It's, so you have to look at those. Medicare requirements are slightly different. Medicaid requirements vary by state. So it's, making sure that what lines of business or plans you're signing up to
That makes a
participate
ton
in.
of sense. Well, and the big question here, Cathy, is are rates negotiable?
Rates, most plans, depending on their need, there may be opportunity for some negotiation. There is, and for certain specialties. So for example, child psychiatry, you can probably
Oh,
negotiate.
okay.
I'm just saying, because we know that's a challenge. So if you have a specialty that is a need, or you're in an area where they need access, there may be some opportunity to negotiate. I would also tell you though that plans will likely not negotiate if you've had an increase or been in the network less than a year.
Okay.
And most of the time, if you've negotiated an increase, they'll want to see it go out a couple years before they'll negotiate again.
Interesting.
But if there's an access need or you have a specific specialty that the plan is looking for, usually the big one, usually these days, is seeing
Okay.
kids. I mean, that's usually huge. Or if it's a diagnostic, some diagnostic specialties, sometimes they need eating disorder treatment, sometimes commands higher rates. I'm just, for
Yeah.
example, in behavioral health, because there are fewer programs.
Wow.
So, and then you can also, plans are slowly getting there to kind of value based, but that's where you need the volume to
Yeah.
drive. And those can be pay for performance, for meeting certain standards. They can be bundled payments, maybe or a case rate type structure. There's different levels of value based contracts. So, but they're not going to do those until they have some experience with you, like a year at least of experience with some volume that they can actually
Okay.
assess. But they're going to look at outcomes. And most plans have on their websites some things like preferred provider networks, or things that, like, if you can get somebody in for an appointment within 7 days, you can offer an appointment and they see that consistent pattern. They may pay a higher rate for providers that sign up to do those kinds of
Whoa.
things.
So, like, if you can if you can take somebody who's not interested in services or somebody who's interested in services to seeing a provider in 7 days, and you can prove it, you can negotiate a higher rate.
If you look at some of the plan websites, you can find they usually have a specialized name for that network, and it's like the immediate access network or something like that. And then you can sign up and commit to doing certain things. Those they have a higher fee schedule for
Oh,
providers that have committed to doing those certain things. So some plans, they may call it a gold card program for facilities where if they consistently 99+% of their authorization requests for services have been approved, they may waive, an authorization requirement at a higher level of
oh my
care
goodness.
for that particular facility and they review on the back end, but they say, hey, this facility is following evidence-based practices. We haven't denied an auth for them. And 99% of the time, things are approved. They're doing good work. We're seeing good outcomes. So there's gold card programs, and you can see articles about that. It'll be in the news. It'll be like I read them in
Mm-hmm.
Becker's and Modern
Yeah, that's right.
Healthcare,
Yep.
and all of those kinds of places that tell you about those kind of programs. So yeah, they have programs like that. Some of them have programs where you might get providers with a high enough volume get a scorecard that tells them how they're doing on certain metrics. And they look at administratively timely filing of claims. They look at average number of sessions by diagnostic category on an outpatient basis, average length of stay. They look at admissions to higher levels of care. Were you able to keep somebody out? Accepting new patients, getting a patient into care post discharge from a higher level of care, whether it's one of your own returning patients or a new patient, that if you can get them in, because there's a requirement health plans are looking to meet, that every patient discharged from a higher level of care, say inpatient site or coming out of an ER first
Mm-hmm.
site, is seen by a community-based provider within 7 days
Wow.
of that
Who's making
discharge.
that regulation? Is that
That's
the
really
state
important.
or the government making that regulation?
It's actually a HEDIS measure, which is the health something data something set. It's HEDIS,
Okay.
HEDIS. NCQA helps set those and measure those. It's a
Cool.
quality measure. And there's a whole list of them across all different specialties. But in behavioral health, two of the biggest ones that they really look at are the having an appointment with a community provider within 7 days of discharge from a higher level of care or an ER
Wow. That's unbelievable.
for a behavioral health
I didn't know that.
diagnosis.
That's very, very interesting.
And it's one of the things plans are measured on. It's also, I think it's a part of this, and the HEDIS measures also roll up to the Medicare STARS program
Right.
for health
Right.
plans. So,
It seems
so
like it's all connected. It's like a
all the,
big web of like
it is,
interconnectedness, and I think it's that,
it
and
is.
we appreciate you laying that out because I think it's that interconnectedness that a lot of clinicians in private practice they don't get to see, they don't know
Hmm.
that it's there, and they don't know that that's what they're
Hmm.
dealing with from a bureaucratic perspective. So I think that's
Hmm.
extremely helpful. One of the Speaking of like big webs of things, the rise of quote unquote big therapy, right?
Hmm.
Talk about that and talk about how what you're seeing in the aggregate NPI data. I think that that's really helpful, and how you get aggregate NPI data. What does that mean?
So NPI are transparency
Okay.
data. So the transparency data is all health plans, federal regulation, to publish their contracted rates with providers in a machine readable file.
Okay.
There's the challenge. It's not something you can download on your computer. It's a machine readable file. If you can download the file, you probably won't have the software to
Hmm.
open and read it. So there are companies out there who actually download, scrub that data and can give you reports or give you the base data so you can look at it. Typically, what I do is I do it in two ways. I get the data from a company, a specific set of CPT codes, because I'm focused in behavioral
Hmm.
health. So I have a set of 100 CPT codes
So
that I may look
sorry to
at
interrupt you.
versus the whole.
Which
Mhm.
companies do you recommend? We can shout those out. Might as well. What are the companies you recommend using?
There's a couple of them out there. I work with
Okay.
Tynbil, Tynbil. Seraph is
Hmm.
another one that I'm aware of. There's a
Like
couple more
Clarify
too.
Health,
Those are
maybe
two that I
Atlas. I know
just
Optum has one
need
that's just
this.
Optum's
Hang
data. Go
on.
figure, yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, but then what you do is you get that data and you can take a look at it and kind of look where I look more at aggregate by health plan. So when I'm looking at it as a consultant, I usually want to just look at, okay, I want to know what the minimum rate they're paying, the maximum rate they're paying, kind of what the average rate they're paying is for this code by state for this
Okay.
plan. So I kind of get an idea of where rates are. Usually in that, I also look for the most common rates and I'm like, okay, I'm betting that's probably the MDs because
That's the
that's the
big
MD
rate.
rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
can
right.
figure it out. So I do kind of that, and then I do an analysis. And sometimes for some clients, they say, we want to look at our competitors. So then I will request a specific report and pull, you can go to NPES and you can look up
Right.
anybody's NPI number. So I pull the NPI numbers and give it to the company I'm working with and say, hey, I want to know the rates for these organizations in these states with this from
Yikes.
these plans. I want to see what that transparency data says. So, and the data varies by plan, what it looks like based on their systems. It's very interesting. I mean, I obviously have a little bit of an advantage because I understand the system setups. I've
Yeah,
worked
right.
with the rates and reporting from inside, so I can look at them. So that's what I look at. And then when it comes to negotiating rate, the other thing I look at the Medicare rates because you can look those up on CMS's website in the physician fee schedule lookup and the Medicare rate in any given market. And, there's a way they pay them. So physicians are 100% of that Medicare
Mm-hmm.
published fee schedule. And then usually the way they plans do it is PhDs and nurse practitioners, PAs, they're at 85% of that published Medicare fee schedule. And master's level are
Okay.
75% of that published fee schedule. The fee schedule is the physician rate. So that's typically what plans do. Plans often use those Medicare rates as a benchmark and they pay a percentage. They set their fee schedule based on a percentage of those
Oh, wow.
Medicare rates. It's an easy national benchmark, readily available benchmark of rates. The other rate structures I tend to look at is you can look at what's called the CMAQ rates, which those are the rates paid by
Oh,
TRICARE
interesting. Where do you find those rates?
on a
Oh,
CMAQ,
got
a
it.
website for CMAQ rates, and it's publicly available to get those rates. And that's a good comparison. They're usually pretty close to in line with
Okay.
Medicare rates, but that's what say Humana Federal and TriWest use to set their rate schedules. And actually, if you look at their contracts, their rate schedules are set as a percentage of the published CMAQ
That
rate for
makes
the market.
sense, right? They want to just find a benchmark and hold to it for a while. It seems like it's
Mm-hmm,
probably economically viable. What are you seeing for?
mm-hmm,
So you're in the mental health space primarily.
mm-hmm.
What are you seeing for these like large mental health tech firms? I mean, are you seeing that they have better negotiating power? If you had a crystal ball and could look in the future, what do you think is going to happen with the rates and with those companies in general?
I would say that those companies unless they're doing something extra, something specialized. So, but if we're looking at the generalist organizations, and we all
Yeah,
know who those are, there's Headway, there's Brightline, there's Rula,
there's a
there's
bunch of them.
there's
Yeah.
Alma, there's a bunch of them. What they're doing, and during COVID, they had an opportunity to really negotiate rates because they had the platform and they were bringing that access that we lost during the
Yeah, it was
public
actually
health
quite
emergency.
innovative. Yeah.
So, right at that time. Yeah. And so they did negotiate some higher rates. Think what is happening as there's gotten to be more of them. The plans are pushing back and saying, hey, two things. One, we're only going to give you maybe higher rates for net new providers. So if the providers are already contracted with the health plan and they're already contracted for the standard rate, why are they going to pay them more to
Yeah, it
bill
doesn't
through
make
Headway?
sense.
Or any of the other aggregators? Because honestly, all they're doing is paying that aggregator
More.
an admin fee over. The provider isn't always necessarily getting that much
Oh,
more
no.
because they're having to pay, they're taking a cut, the aggregator, and the provider may be having to pay a use fee or an access fee to use that
Oh,
platform.
so Yeah.
Could be not
Yeah.
all of them, but it maybe there is that depending on the other arrangements. So, and I think that plans are going to be pushing back on some of those rates. There's going to be some
So what does that
renegotiation.
mean for the aggregators though? Does that mean that they have to increase, because we assume they went to good schools and got good grades and they can negotiate pretty well. Do you think they will increase
Hmm.
the productivity requirements of the clinicians? Do you think they're going to find another loophole to negotiate? What do you think is the play there?
I think they're going to have to figure out because I know I've heard that when sometimes that's happened, they've passed on the rate reductions to the clinicians. So
Oof.
that the clinicians end up getting a lower rate or it gets pushed down. Hopefully not below what the health plan standard rate is.
You'd hope not.
And I
Yeah.
think, yeah, and I think there are some things that some of those aggregators are offering. Um, they're expanding what's on their platform, whether it be an EHR that they can use for all their patients, not just referrals. So they're expanding some of the things. So I think there may be some tools or getting some of that outcome data potentially to payers that payers really want to see, are your providers performing well? But one of the things I know that they're starting to look at is net new. So, hey, I can maybe negotiate with you, but I want new providers. I don't want you just giving me my providers I
Right.
already
Which,
have.
from my perspective, you tell me if I'm totally off on this. Doesn't that mean that the independent private practice has a unique opportunity here to step in and say, we are adding net new clinicians, right?
Hmm.
Why not give us
Hmm.
the rate that you're giving that aggregator?
It could. It could be. And it depends on the payer in the state.
Mm,
So in some states, you may have one health plan that has most of the business in that state.
it's true.
And then that health plan is much less likely to
Yeah.
negotiate. It's also important to pay attention to what's happening in the news, especially with the big payers.
Mm.
There's quite a bit happening, say, with United in the news. They just had another change in
Yeah, what are your predictions on that? I was going to ask you about it. I was hoping we had time. We have time to talk about it. What's your prediction on what that means and what's coming next for them?
That's interesting. I think there's a lot been in the news about all of the payers who have really taken a hit on medical cost with the Medicare Advantage
That's
population.
right. That's right.
So that's driving a lot of costs, but also those are also people that are accessing care through some of those aggregators that may have gotten at higher rates.
Oh,
And there's some of that on the medical side too. It's not limited to behavioral health, but so I think it's going to be interesting to see how they play this out because United obviously has a huge Medicare Advantage business
huge.
in this country. It's huge. And they also have through AARP the Medigap insurance. So they have a huge book of Medicare type of business. So I think we're going to see they're going to be looking at what they're paying on their unit cost. They're going to be looking for providers that can provide them with good outcomes. So keeping members engaged, making sure members are doing the preventative things. I think they're going to be looking for all of those things that are going to drive good outcomes, which ultimately reduces
Okay.
costs. And they'll probably take a look at some of their rates. So, or they'll hold firm. They'll just say, "Hey, we can't do any increases."
It'll be very
So
interesting
try to
because the
level things.
Medicare Advantage population was a
It'll
little
be
bit more clinical than they had expected, I think.
Well, I mean, I was talking to a colleague and he said, "Who'd have thought the elderly population is going to use medical services? Who would have thought of that?" And it was a friend of mine. He goes, and he's an actuary. He goes, "Yeah, who would have thought that?" I'm
Well,
like, "Okay, come on."
that makes sense.
Yes. So, but yeah, there is that because they were thinking too, people are staying, the other part of that is people are staying healthier longer, but people are also living
Yeah,
longer.
that's right.
So, and then you have the whole baby boomer.
Yeah, right. Wave that's coming in for sure. My
Right.
goodness.
Right. Yeah, I think, yeah, we'll see. And I am the last year of the baby boom
Oh,
generation. I'm like right
there
on
you
that
go.
cusp. So I'm in that group in the next, 5 to 7 years that's going to be rolling onto
Oh, yeah,
Medicare.
that's right. That's
So,
right.
so if you think about that whole picture, yeah, you've got a lot of people and people that are living longer, and there's treatments for more complex health issues.
Yeah, it's true. No, it's very true. Well, Cathy, I appreciate everything you've said here. Unbelievable insight that you've given us. The goal of our podcast here is to give clinicians and their staff clear systems and best practices for revenue cycle management. If you had one word of insight into the territory of credentialing, as someone who spent decades shaping and creating the landscape, what would that one word of insight be?
It would be for credentialing, keep your information current in CAQH so that everything aligns, and that will make things go. Because if your information is wrong in credentialing, that's what feeds the system to load how they pay you, the credentialing application. So my word is keep your data current from credentialing because it will impact your claim getting paid.
Amazing. So Cathy, what do you do now? What are you up to? Do you work with people? I mean, it seems like you have some really solid insight and data analytics, and it seems like you can help with a lot of items for private practices. What do you offer, and how can people reach you?
Well, I do consulting for provider organizations, and it's from startups. So on a shoestring, very new. A lot of the tech startups, the tech-enabled treatment. Also with some organizations that are actually adding more traditional bricks and mortar programs. So I work with provider practices. I help review contracts, help negotiate and guide negotiation, help with resolving credentialing issues, just in general navigating managed care. Probably, and the best way to reach me is really just by my email address. I work independently. And I have colleagues in other areas of specialty other than network who are, they work in different areas of health plans. All of us have worked in health plans for many years, but we have slightly different areas of expertise. So I have resources that way from colleagues. But to reach me, email me at Cathy with a C .Gilbert CEGhealth.com. And that's the best way to reach me. I do monitor my emails, and more than willing to talk to people about how I might be able to help.
That's amazing. And we'll put your email in the show notes as well on your website. And well, Cathy, thank you so much again for being here and being on this episode of The Claim Game.
No, it's great. Nice talking to you, Jeremy, and good luck with this. I look forward to seeing it out there.
If you enjoyed today's episode of The Claim Game, please take a moment to leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. It really helps new listeners to find us. Make sure you never miss an episode by subscribing to The Claim Game on your favorite podcast app. Your feedback means so much to us. We want to provide valuable education about revenue cycle management. So if there's something we didn't cover in our topic that was a burning question for you, please let us know so we can try to get you the information you desire. You can find the links to all resources we mentioned in this episode in the show notes. And if you want to dive deeper into our resources, we have two places you can do that. First, you can go to our blog at practicesol.com/blog, where we have 8 years of educational blogs. If you want to learn more about what Practice Solutions does, reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Just go to practicesol.com to learn more and to connect with one of our awesome people on our team. Thanks for listening. We are Jeremy and Catherine Zug, and this is The Claim Game. See you at the game table next time.